Have you ever noticed how some people seem to learn things insanely fast, while others spend hours studying and still feel lost? Same classroom, same teacher, same book, but completely different results. Why does that happen? Are some people just born smarter? Or is there a hidden system behind the way high performers study? Here's the truth most people never hear. The way you were taught to study in school is outdated, inefficient, and in many cases, completely wrong. And once you understand the real strategies top students use, the entire game changes. Because studying more hours is not the secret. Studying differently is. Think about it. How were you told to study growing up? Read the chapter. Highlight the important parts. Maybe rewrite some notes. Then repeat until the exam arrives. Sounds familiar, right? The problem is that this method feels productive, but scientifically it's one of the least effective ways to learn anything. You sit there for hours thinking you're absorbing information, but most of it disappears from your brain within days. And this isn't just an opinion. Cognitive science has been studying learning for decades, and the evidence is very clear. The techniques most students rely on are almost useless for long-term memory. Now imagine discovering that there are specific methods that can make you learn faster, remember longer, and understand deeper without spending more time studying. That's exactly what high achievers, memory champions, and top university students quietly do. They don't rely on willpower. They rely on systems that turn your brain into a learning machine. And today you're going to learn 5 of those study tricks that most schools never really teach. The first trick is something called active recall. And if you only remember 1 idea from this video, make it this one. Because active recall is the closest thing to a learning superpower. Instead of rereading information over and over, you force your brain to retrieve the information from memory. That might sound simple, but the difference it makes is massive. When you read a page 5 times, your brain recognizes the information and creates the illusion of learning. But when you close the book and try to explain the concept from memory, suddenly you realize what you truly understand and what you don't. That moment of struggle when you try to remember something is exactly what strengthens memory. It's like a mental workout. Every time your brain pulls information out of storage, the neural connections become stronger. This is why flashcards work so well. This is why quizzes help learning. And this is why students who constantly test themselves remember more than students who just read their notes. Instead of asking, "Did I read this?" the real question becomes, "Can I recall this without looking?" Here's a simple way to apply it immediately. After studying a topic for 10 minutes, close your notes and write down everything you remember. No cheating, no looking back, just pure recall. Then check your notes and see what you missed. That gap between what you remembered and what you forgot becomes your roadmap for improvement. Do this repeatedly and your brain starts adapting. Suddenly studying becomes active instead of passive, and active learning always wins. The second trick is called spaced repetition, and it completely changes how memory works. Most students study like this. They cram everything the night before the test. Maybe they survive the exam, but 1 week later the knowledge is gone. That happens because memory decays quickly unless it's reinforced at the right time. But here's the interesting part. Reviewing information right before you're about to forget, it dramatically strengthens memory retention. Think of it like watering a plant. If you dump a huge bucket of water once a month, the plant dies. But small amounts of water spread over time make it grow strong. Your brain works the same way. Instead of studying something for 3 hours in one day, review it briefly over several days or weeks. 10 minutes today, 5 minutes tomorrow. another review in 3 days, then again next week. Every time you revisit the information, the memory becomes more stable. This technique is so powerful that it's used by language learners, medical students, and even memory champions. Apps like Anki and other spaced repetition systems are built entirely around this principle. And people who use them consistently can memorize enormous amounts of information with far less effort than traditional study methods. The key idea is simple. Timing matters more than intensity. A short review at the right moment is worth more than hours of cramming. Now let's move to the third trick, and this one might sound strange at first. It's called the Feynman technique, named after the famous physicist Richard Feynman, who was known for explaining extremely complex ideas in incredibly simple ways. His philosophy was brutally honest. If you can't explain something in simple language, you don't actually understand it. You only think you do. Most people study by trying to memorize complicated explanations. But true understanding happens when you can break an idea down so clearly that even a child could grasp it. That process forces your brain to simplify, organize, and connect information. And the moment you try to explain a concept out loud, something fascinating happens. You immediately notice the parts where your knowledge becomes fuzzy. That confusion reveals exactly what you still need to learn. Here's how you apply the Feynman technique. Pick a concept you're studying and pretend you're teaching it to someone who knows nothing about the topic. Use simple words. Avoid technical jargon. Build the explanation step by step. If you get stuck, go back to your notes, study the missing piece, and try again. Over time, your explanations become clearer and your understanding becomes deeper. Teaching, even imaginary teaching, is one of the fastest ways to master any subject. The fourth trick is something most students completely ignore. Interleaving. Instead of studying one topic for hours before moving to another, interleaving mixes different topics or problem types within the same study session. At first, this feels harder. Your brain has to constantly switch contexts, but that difficulty is exactly what makes the learning stronger. Because when topics are mixed, your brain must actively choose the correct method for each situation. Think about learning math. If you solve 20 identical problems in a row, your brain quickly enters autopilot. You're not really thinking anymore. But if the problems are mixed algebra, geometry, statistics, your brain has to pause, analyze the question, and decide which strategy applies. That process strengthens problem-solving skills and builds flexible knowledge. Studies consistently show that students who use interleaving perform better on exams than those who study topics in blocks. Professional athletes train this way too. Basketball players don't practice only free throws for an entire session. They mix dribbling, shooting, passing, and defensive drills. The variation forces the brain to adapt quickly. Learning becomes dynamic instead of repetitive, and that dynamic learning sticks longer. Now let's talk about the fifth trick, and this one might be the most surprising. Deliberate breaks and mental recovery. Many people believe productivity means studying nonstop for hours. But neuroscience tells a completely different story. Your brain isn't designed for endless focus. After about 60 to 90 minutes of intense concentration, cognitive performance starts dropping dramatically. Memory formation weakens attention, phages, mistakes increase. But when you take strategic breaks, something incredible happens. Your brain shifts into what scientists call the default mode network. This is when the mind processes information in the background, connects ideas, and strengthens memory. In other words, some of your most important learning happens when you step away from the desk. This is why techniques like the Pomodoro method work so well. Study intensely for about 25 to 50 minutes, then take a short break, walk around, stretch, drink water. Avoid scrolling endlessly on social media because that overloads your brain with new information. Instead, give your mind space to breathe. When you return to studying, your focus resets and your efficiency. Now think about what we've covered so far. Active recall trains your brain to retrieve information. Spaced repetition locks knowledge into long-term memory. The Feynman technique transforms confusion into clarity. Interleaving builds flexible thinking, and deliberate breaks protect your mental energy. Each method is powerful on its own, but when combined, they create a completely different way of learning. And here's the fascinating part. These techniques are backed by decades of cognitive science research. Universities like Stanford, MIT, and Harvard actively teach these strategies to high-performing students, yet most people never hear about them during their early education. Instead, they struggle with inefficient methods that waste time and energy. Imagine what happens when someone replaces passive studying with these 5 systems. Suddenly, they don't need 12 hours to prepare for an exam. They might need 4. Their retention improves, their stress decreases, their confidence grows, because learning stops feeling like an exhausting grind and starts feeling like a structured process. Think about the implications beyond school. These methods aren't just for students. They work for learning languages, mastering professional skills, preparing for certifications, or understanding complex subjects. In a world where information is everywhere, the real advantage belongs to people who know how to learn efficiently. And the best part, you don't need special talent to use these techniques. You don't need a higher IQ. You only need the willingness to change how you study. The difference between struggling learners and fast learners is often not intelligence, it's strategy. So, here's a challenge for you. The next time you study something, don't just read your notes. Test yourself, explain the idea out loud. Review it tomorrow. Mix topics. Take strategic breaks. Watch how your brain responds. The first sessions might feel harder because active learning requires effort. But that effort is exactly what builds powerful memory. Thousands of students around the world have already discovered these methods. Medical students memorizing enormous volumes of information. Language learners becoming fluent faster. Professionals mastering new skills in record time. The pattern is always the same. Once people learn how learning actually works, everything changes. And now the question becomes simple. If these techniques can transform the way people learn, why aren't they taught everywhere from the beginning? Maybe the system simply never updated. Maybe traditional habits are hard to change. But one thing is certain. You don't have to wait for the system to change in order to upgrade the way you study. Because once you know the rules of how the brain learns, you stop fighting against your mind and start working with it. And that's when studying stops feeling like torture and starts feeling like progress. So, the next time you sit down to learn something new, remember, this success doesn't belong to the people who study the longest. It belongs to the people who study the smartest